Mate, spring loaded. The shows and the lineup seem to be a real throwback to the 90s.
Totally.
Yeah, what let's take me back to kind of 90s because the 90s was obviously a huge decade for your band. What were some of the the high points of Shihad's existence during that decade?
Um, any of the big day outs we did, like that was still my favorite festival. I don't think there's been a festival since that sort of basically had that programming sort of um, idea of just, is it good? Okay, it's good, stick it on. You know, it didn't matter if it was metal, it didn't matter if it was dance, it didn't matter if it was indie weirdo shit or pop. It was just like, is it good? And and it was a great time for when the tribes came together, and it you could fucking see the best shit in the planet. And it was just a great tour. The way Ken and Vivian like had it all open plan backstage as well, it meant that all the internationals had to hang out with the local artists as well. So you'd be fucking, one year taking ecstasy with Joe Strummer down to the beach in Perth. And then the next meeting, Peter Hook, from Joy Division. And it was just like, this is fucking amazing, like just being around other artists and going, all right, the ones that last tended to be the ones who took it like a job. It was a job, and had a really good work ethic. And that's, I think, something that was really important for us early on to go, right, it's not about the fucking bullshit, not about the parties, not about the fame. It's about how much work you put in is what you get out of it, and it's all the big bands we ever played with, whether it's Black Sabbath or AC/DC, it's like those motherfuckers are there to do a job, and that's how She Had sort of managed to, I think, stick around for as long as it did, because it was like we never got too far up our own ass, realizing that it is actually just a fucking good job that we are so fortunate to be able to do. But we've got a real good work ethic because of being around those sort of bands and being around other artists to sort of give us those cues, like, so I think that was a really good time for us. I remember like making the General Electric. We'd moved to Australia, and we'd been touring up and down the Hume Highway and everything for like 2 years, not really getting very far, but still. I mean, we'd hop out of the van before when we landed at a pub, and it would always say SHIHAD, and then in brackets NZ. We'd always fucking rub out NZ because we just wanted to be a band, And so we didn't, we wanted to actually play to Australians, not just expats, which is not, I'm not saying that's a bad thing either, but we just wanted to be a band, And so 2 years of that, but then we got our shit together, and we were all living in Melbourne, and we wrote what became the General Electric album, and we're really focused. Made it with Garth Richardson, who made, the first Rage Against the Machine record in Vancouver. It sounded humongous. Came back and then did a tour of all of Australia with UMI. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen Timmy Rogers on A Good Night. He's a formidable front guy, so I got to learn and watch him, and but also great band as well. And but they also went to places that we couldn't have played ourselves. But we had all this material, and it was like, this is really working. And then out of the blue, we were booked on the big day out that year, but we were on the third stage. And out of the blue, Jay Wally from Frenzell broke his arm, and they were on the main stage, so they couldn't play the gig. So Ken and Vivian swapped us out. So we went, sweet, we've got the General Electric. And we just slammed it. And so from there, I think things started to take off, and yeah, just a few things happened that were good. And so that's sort of what I remember about the 90s. It was a pretty good time. It was a good time for music for me. I mean, maybe nostalgic, but for me, it was like, fuck, the 90s was like in, alternative music. So you started off with like from metal. For us, it was like from metal we sort of went Jane's Addiction, Faith No More, and then things like Fugazi, and then Sonic Youth, and then it all opened up, and it was just like, fuck, you can do so much with guitars. It's not funny, like right up to My Bloody Valentine, Loveless, which was a big record for us. It was like, fuck, that's a wall of guitar, but it's actually really beautiful, So I thought it was a pretty interesting time for music. And it was a good time to be being in a band, basically, and touring, especially with a festival like Big Day Out running around, you know?
I only just discovered Bloody Valentine recently, and yeah, that Loveless album, it's absolutely gorgeous, and also just the tone of it. It is the most quintessentially early '90s like album. Like it just reminds, because I was 10 years old in 1995. You know, I was coming up in
Right.
this club, so it just reminds me of sounds that I heard as a kid. You know, like
Mm, mm.
I love it.
It still sounds good to me now. It's like the guitars are way too loud, the vocals are way too low, but that's great. You know, that's what it
Mm,
needed to be. Sort of like it reminded me of actually seeing a band live, and you couldn't quite make out shit. You know, like I like that sort of
yeah.
non-defined.
So, like conversely, mate, what were some of the biggest challenges of that period?
Well, I suppose coming to the end of the 2000s and rolling over was the whole. I think we'd signed a really average record deal in Europe with a German metal label called Noise Records when we were really young, like first album, and they had us sewn up uh, for 5 albums. So we, in essence, what it boiled down to, it meant that we didn't have any distribution in America. So we were touring, you know, with Faith No More in Europe, and then with Silverchair and through all of Europe as well, and doing these great things in Europe, but we couldn't go to America because we didn't have a release there, and they wouldn't license us to anybody else. They had an office which was just basically some guy's house in the back of the San Fernando Valley, and it was just out of a garage, you know. So it just didn't work, you know. And so we were basically waiting out 5 albums to finally get a chance to fucking, you know, to release an album in the home of rock and roll. I mean, let's face it, I'm a big British music fan, but I also love Master of Puppets. I love Slayer's Rain and Blood. These are big albums for us, and we wanted to go to the home of that shit, you know, and we just couldn't. So when we finally got the opportunity, which was after the General Electric, we signed a deal with a production company, which was through this producer called Josh Abraham, who'd had a big hit with Stain's "It's Been a While," you know, that song, you know. So he was the hot thing in LA, and he came and saw us in New York and went, "Man, this band's fucking amazing. I'm signing you." And then we went, "Okay, cool." We weren't big fans of the new metal sound. It was a little bit. I thought it was really fucking conservative, especially after coming out of the '90s with Sonic Youth and Fugazi and, you know, Dinosaur Jr. and all this shit. I thought it was sort of, everything was getting a little bit conservative musically, I thought. But it was he did believe in us, and we went, fuck, he believes in us, so let's go. We went, and then 2 weeks into the production, pre-production in LA, September the 11th happened, and we were basically, whoa, fuck. Our first thing was like, shit, I want to get out of America and go back home, you know, like, because it was frightening, basically. Everyone was freaking out. And then it came, over the next 4 to 5 weeks, it became abundantly clear that having the name SHIHAD at that time was sort of like calling yourself Death to America. And so our record company started, you know, the production company started freaking out, going, fuck, you know, like, you know, we're playing your stuff to these booking agents and they love it, but they're not going to book you with that name. We're playing it to the radio stations, they love the song, but they're not going to, they're not going to play it with a name like that. So it was like, man, it was just a really awkward situation. So we're making a record, finally get all our dreams, but it was like the universe went, yeah, you can have everything, but this is the price you have to pay, you know, like, and it was like, oh, for fuck's sake, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So we keep our integrity and don't compromise, and then basically say goodbye to America again, because it went pretty hardcore, you know, nationalistic sort of, you know, flag waving, and it was like they'd been hit for the first time ever, and it was like they were out for blood, you know, and so yeah, I mean, yeah, it was like, So anyway, we were making this record. It went on for ages. It went for 6 months. Like we were writing in the studio, which we'd never done before. We had all these people coming in for the first time ever. We had, like radio guys and record execs going, maybe you should try this and maybe you should try that. And it was like, we totally lost ourselves, like going, second guessing ourselves, going, maybe, well, he signed the police, so maybe he knows something that I don't know about my music, like it was classic. It was like the sort of mistake you make on your first album, we made on our fifth or sixth album, like, because we'd never been around that. We'd been sort of in sheltered little New Zealand, Australia, just making the fucking records we wanted to make and going, fuck you to anybody who said anything. And then finally it was like, well, we're in America, maybe we should listen. But it was a really tough time for me personally, and all the guys in the band. It was just like, what, should we change the name so that we can release a record, or do we stick to our guns and not change the name and then not release a record in the place we'd wanted, we dreamed about as kids, and it was like, it was a shit situation basically. Well, and then we did change the name to Pacifier, right? So It was a fucking nightmare. And it was like, well, what's our biggest song? Okay, Pacifier. At that point, Pacifier was our biggest song, right? So, I mean, and then it was, the thing is, I didn't want to do it, but we were getting hassled from every fucking corner. And we ended up just going, oh, fuck, there you go. And then it was just like, we had hell to pay when we got home. And it was fair enough, because I felt like a total sellout as well. Because, it was like, that was our name. For good or not, like, I mean, I remember, we came up with that name when we were smoking bongs watching Dune, in 1988, right? So, listening to Slayer, watching David Lynch's Dune, smoking bongs. The battle at the end was the SHIHAD. We were like, oh, fuck, that's a good name for a speed metal band. And then I totally misspelled it, stole the Motorhead logo font and wrote it on the back of my jean jacket. And that was it. That was the name. And then it wasn't till, later on, and we're all like, listening to My Bloody Valentine and taking acid and going, fuck, there's so much more than metal, that I went, oh my God, I'm in a band called Holy Wars. What the fuck? This is like way before any of this shit happened. But it was like, so we were always like, is this name cool? But we just made it cool because the band was good. The band was a great live band, had some cool songs, and we just owned it in the end. And then it was weird because I was always the one going, fuck, this name's shit. And then when someone said, hey, you got to change your name, I went, fuck you. I'm not changing my name, So for 6 months, I held off, and everyone was like going, fuck, man, we've got to do this. I don't want to be shot if we're touring the southern states of America. And it was like, yeah, but... And then eventually I caved. And I hated the decision as soon as we did it. And I think the funniest thing to come out of it was the guys from Friends of Rom offering to take SHIHAD as a name. that was gold, because they were doing the radio show at that point. So I think we even did an interview about
it. It could have been worse. Man. It could have been very much worse. You could have released an album called God Hates Us All on September 11, 2001, because that's what Slayer did.
True, actually true. Or being called Anthrax, and they were getting. Yeah, they were getting shit for their name, and it's like, what the fuck, man? I mean, it was so over the top sensitive, like they were, radio stations were banning, John Lennon's Imagine and stuff like this. It was like, they were over the top. We were touring around the States when they were burning Dixie Chicks records. Like, it was madness, man. It was fucking crazy. Mind you, the world's even more fucking crazy now. So. So